Time where my patrons vote on albums I've missed over the past 3 months, and I give my thoughts. Here's How Did I Miss This for the first quarter of 2021.
If you'd like to have a say in upcoming videos like this, please consider supporting Rocked on Patreon. You can have a say in voting and see videos early. Please click the link in the description for more information.
6 albums to go through, so let's not waste any time. The first album to talk about is When You See Yourself, the 8th studio album from Kings of Leon.
With their NFT album that confused the world by just what an NFT is, Kings of Leon are continuing to prove that they are international stars with their music. I made a video last month about how big of a deal Kings of Leon are outside of the United States, and with the band's 8th studio album, When You See Yourself, the family band pushes on to prove that notion. When You See Yourself, running 51 minutes across 11 tracks, gives listeners and longtime fans much of that style that put them on the map originally, but only if mellowed down in energy a touch. Years after screaming about Sex on Fire comes thick bass melodies more comfortably sang in standard volume. This album is a case of the singles being the standout tracks by a long shot, with the Bandit being the main song that most listeners will gravitate toward. There are shining moments like with 100,000 People and A Wave where the entire band is on the same page and the rhythm takes you over, but for the majority of the album, however, it's as if a bot was programmed to listen to every song by Kings of Leon ever and make a new album based off that processed data. The music is well performed, the mixing has a sleek polish on it, even if the vocals are still sounding way too low on top of the rhythm section, but maybe that's just me, and I would struggle to say I hate anything on this album. But on the reverse side, there isn't anything on When You See Yourself I can glowingly write home about.
This album, token, whatever, feeds exactly to Kings of Leon fans who want a more aged, slightly retrospective Kings of Leon. Much of the album goes into southern rock and edges toward twang with that western style, but it still definitely feels like Kings of Leon to a fault. Not a bad album by any means, and there are good tracks, but so much of this we have heard before, and it could use quite a bit more energy throughout.
Overall, When You See Yourself is a token of an album for Kings of Leon fans that will satisfy hearing the staple of their sound again. This is a serviceable record that, while at times goes through the motions, is still technically sound and peaks with a few tracks to warrant hearing what Kings of Leon are up to in 2021.
Up next, Detroit Stories, a return to rock roots from shock rocker Alice Cooper.
A return to roots for a rock legend. Alice Cooper still is an active force in 2021, and since 2020 squashed any chance of touring, which he still does a great job with, the album Detroit Stories is classic rock brought to 2021, and that is exactly what Alice Cooper aimed for to the letter. In a genre plagued with dime a dozen metalcore and aging post-grunge, Alice Cooper just wants to be Alice Cooper. Detroit Stories, running 15 tracks across 50 minutes, was in Alice Cooper's own words, time to do a really fun rock and roll album while the whole country is coming out of the pandemic. That's the main reasoning for this album's existence. This is exactly what a classic rock album from the 70s would sound like with current production standards almost to a fault. In many ways, this music writing is no frills, no overarching story, just music meant to have a good time with. Detroit Stories is comfort food for rock fans of a bygone era. Whether it's $1,000 high heel shoes or Shut Up and Rock, you know exactly what you're getting into with just barely a minute of listening time, and to be fair, that's what sells the album. Alice Cooper sounds fine on the performance, the background vocals in certain songs are nice, and there's a lighthearted sense of fun permeating Detroit Stories. Is it mind-blowing? No. Is it Cooper's best work? Not at all. Is it bad? Not at all either. In many ways, it's a simple album that isn't labeled as anything else, and it's just fun enough to warrant a listen.
It's not a masterpiece, and it's very simplistic in what it offers, but it's well made, and there were a few tracks that had me coming back. It's an Alice Cooper album, and that's exactly what some people needed right now. Even the most cynical, curmudgeon-y music snob could listen to this and appreciate what it's trying to do. The fun side of rock, nothing crazy, even though Alice Cooper is a little bit crazy.
Overall, Alice Cooper made a lighthearted, fun album representing music from decades ago to help lift our spirits and have us focus on something else besides a plague of impending doom. Shock rock might be a style of the past, but solid music can still come from the shocking ones.
Next is The Future Bites, the 6th studio album from the UK's Steven Wilson.
Electronic rock, pop rock, synth rock, whatever you want to call it, Steven Wilson has made a career through creativity in a subgenre overtaken by young alternative groups. The difference is Wilson is still a standout, especially with solo albums going back to 2008. The Future Bites, Wilson's 6th full album, is spawned from being surrounded by many world events going on, most of them frustrating. Brexit, Boris Johnson, Trump, all these things were influencing the state of mind for Wilson while writing The Future Bytes. Add a pandemic which delayed the album, and it's almost as if the album was created by everything awful. When you listen to the album, however, it's surprisingly peaceful, serenity in a tumultuous time. The electronic elements and mixing worked in big songs like Personal Shopper and King Ghost, but the more traditional alternative tracks I also enjoy, such as 12 Things I Forgot. This album does sound similar in many moments, but everything does feel loosely connected. A majority of the music is well executed with the electronic beats, and this music is a vibe for people wanting something easier to listen to without falling asleep. Your attention for the most part is kept, and there is a solid craft being displayed.
As someone who does not love every bit of electro pop rock that I hear, I enjoyed a decent amount of the Future Bytes, and Steven Wilson is an artist you really can't go wrong with if that is the style you're looking for. And this is coming from someone who is not even a huge Steven Wilson fan. This album hits the spot for something along the lines of a creative electronic alternative. Several times, in fact.
Overall, the Future Bytes is filled to the brim with rhythms and rock and electronica while still feeling unique in an alternative field plagued with overproduction. A solid example of well-crafted digital music along with good standard quieter rock tracks, and you are bound to find something you enjoy here.
Up next is the self-titled album from Alabama's metalcore band, Erra.
Erra is a band I've heard about for years in the metalcore scene and who have opened up for quite a few bigger acts. Metalcore, I admit I've been burnt out on for a while now, but progressive metal is something that adds a little spice to that style. Erra, the self-titled album and fifth studio album from the group, has been getting decent praise over the last few weeks. The self-titled, running 53 minutes across 12 tracks on surface, is what you'd expect from progressive metalcore, with pounding drum blasts and growling, transitioning into sweeping melodies and clean choruses. After a few listens though, you appreciate that Erra does stand out better than many metalcore bands in the scene. While maybe not as skilled or strikingly memorable, there are definite periphery vibes from this Erra album, and I mean that as a compliment. The tracks that feature both heavy and melodic like House of Glass work. Scorpion Hymn also stands out for how furious it can get. There are tropes of the metalcore chugga chugga indulgence, but for the most part you can hear Erra trying to make something more unique than many other bands of the same kind. There is a unison from each member in each song working together, and it's not completely about volume and fronting with anger. The progressive side works, the riffs and bass blend. Erra do a lot of things right.
I wouldn't put Erra on top of bigger bands like Periphery in terms of execution and creative writing, but Erra definitely presented something solid with this album, and I would have rated it higher if not for a few of the constant chugga chug relying sequences. But the melodic clean sequences and the closing song add enough variety to warrant a listen if this is your style.
Overall, Erra's self-titled offers metalcore fans and prog metal fans something to sink their teeth into. I'm sure past fans of Erra are over the moon about something like this, and for listeners trying to find a new album from a heavier band they haven't heard of yet, Erra and this album might be up your alley.
Speaking of progressive metal, up next is Imperial, the fifth album from Swedish metal group Soen. I have a collection of patrons that only care about metal, and I am aware of that.
Featuring former members of Opeth, Testament, and others, Soen formed in 2012 and gained a bigger following through Europe as the years went on. I was aware that Imperial came out back in January, but being completely honest, Soen is a group I never heard a song from. Imperial, the band's fifth full album, is self-described as provocative, imperious, and engaging. Imperial, running 42 minutes across 8 songs and mixed by Kane Churko, who's also worked with Ozzy Osbourne, this album revolves around the vocal delivery and storytelling of Joel Ekalof. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. This is not the heaviest blistering metal album you'll hear. This is much more in line with progressive metal than Erra by a long shot, and that's obvious after one listen. While the overall runtime is a little bit shorter, each track feels like it takes its time, almost to where it feels like it's a problem. I understand storytelling elements need to set its pace, and while the guitars are solid, the drum track is prominent, there's a good variety in the album. Imperial almost lacks real defining punch when being technically strong. In a few tracks there's a bit more motion and speed, but even then it's not by much, and that's what really made the album drag a bit, which is a shame because you can hear a ton of potential through all of Imperial to be something mammoth, but the finished project isn't something to scream about.
This being my first Soen album, I admit I was looking for more. Not even so much to knock me off my feet, but just more to get invested in. After several listens and reading along with the lyrics, it just went in one ear and out the other after a bit. It's not bad by any means, and I can see why people enjoy this album and Soen, but to me, it's another prog metal album that lacks real identity.
Overall, Imperial is a conceptual album deep with ideas on suffering and survival, just competent enough to deliver musically. Soen fans and prog metal fans may have a good time diving deep into the philosophical meaning with thundering drums and rhythm guitars, but it still feels like Soen could have delivered more.
And finally, let's talk about a band I rarely get to bring up, Epica, with their latest album, Omega.
The most requested album to cover from the first quarter of 2021 is one I'm happy my patrons repeatedly threw at my inbox, as 1, I enjoy symphonic metal, and 2, I rarely get to talk about it. And the Netherlands Epica definitely deserves some attention, as they've been a force in the subgenre for almost 20 years. Omega, the band's 8th studio album, is, no pun intended, epic even upon one listen. Omega, running over 70 minutes across 12 tracks, is a beast when you look at the stats, but it's definitely worth diving headfirst into when you hear how much effort was put in. The gorgeous singing from Simone Simons and brutal screaming from Mark Jansen work seamlessly together and make each song feel enormous. It's the audio equivalence of ferociousness and elegance working together, along with some great guitars and fantastic string work. When I first heard Skeleton Key, I loved the theatrical performance with the back and forth and soaring high moments. Freedom and Kingdom of Heaven are solid midpoints with a burst of energy in a long album where that is vital. Omega revolves around the end, finality, not just with life, but in all things like personal beliefs. Pair that with Epica trying to expand their sound by adding a bigger orchestra and dabbling with different cultures of music, it's clear the band put a massive amount of effort making this album something special.
I understand symphonic metal is not for everyone, and at 70 minutes, something like Omega can seem daunting. If ever you were looking for something different and new to try, listen to Epica's latest album. I cannot stress enough that this is the music you should blast loud with good speakers in the room to become engulfed in over-the-top dramatic music. Singing, screaming, symphonies, it has a lot.
Overall, Omega excels as a massively overwritten juggernaut that's as exciting to listen to as it is long in running time. A journey exploring finality with a strong dynamic and vocalist, this album stands out as a crown jewel for Epica. Symphonic metal fans will be thrilled, and new listeners can find something out of their comfort zone to love. And that was a review on 6 albums I've missed over the last few months. What did you think of everything I've covered? Leave a comment, let everyone know. Big thanks to my patrons, and a special thanks to Brandon Barenfeld, Chris Stoneman, McKenna White, and Dom Noble. You can have a say in upcoming videos like this and see videos early by supporting Rocked on Patreon. Please click the link in the video description for more info. Please subscribe and ring the bell to get notified on upcoming videos. You can check out my concert photography on Instagram, and you can keep up to date with Rocked on Facebook and Twitter.